Today's video is brought to you by Storyblocks. A few weeks back, I did a video breaking down my process of creating documentary films, starting with how to find characters and what I think are some of the most important things to keep in mind when looking for a story to tell. For part 2 of this series, I want to continue the process and focus on how to structure and tell the story to create the most impact and keep your audience focused. What we're going to do is we're going to look at 2 of my films today. We're going to focus mainly on the one on You Will Survive Doomsday, which I've shown a number of times on here, but I'm just going to walk through the different parts of the film and talk about my thoughts when I was structuring it. And this is kind of the method that I use for all of my short documentaries. So we have the opening with the hook, then the middle where the story kind of unfolds, and then the end where we kind of close it out and wrap things up. So I'm going to focus on 3 parts today, and I just also want to mention, I said this in the last video, but this is just my way of working. Obviously, there's a number of different ways to approach this, so just take from it what you will. But let's jump on the computer, we'll jump into the first part. So we're going to start by talking about the intro or the opening of the film, and you only have a short period of time to make an impression on your audience, so it's important for this first section to be impactful and instill kind of a sense of curiosity so that the viewer wants to keep watching. So my process with the opening of a film has always been just to kind of give the viewer like a little hint or hook them somehow. This is going to be story specific, it's going to be different for everyone, but basically just give them a little something in a pretty short period of time, say like 45 seconds or a minute max, just so they want to stick around. It's really important during the intro, obviously, to kind of catch someone's attention and make them want to see how that plays out. So with You Will Survive Doomsday, we'll check out the intro here in a second. Obviously, when I was interviewing Bruce, he had some pretty heavy statements just about nuclear war, stuff like that. So I chose to take a couple of those lines, just, the film opens up, he's in his environment, he's eating pie, you kind of see these interesting visuals, and then he's traveling out to this shelter that he's made, or this underground nuclear shelter. And he sang a couple really heavy lines. So when that scene closes, the audience is kind of left thinking, okay, I want to stick around, I want to keep watching this because I really want to see what this guy's all about and where this goes. So we'll check out the intro and then we'll come back to this for a second.
Most people think it's a nutty idea. No nuclear war is going to happen. Man's too smart for that. And if it does, besides, it'd mean the end of everything, so there's no need to worry about it. That's the way everybody feels. There's enough nuclear destruction that if 100th of it, or maybe even 1,000th of it, were used in the world of 50,000 nuclear weapons, well, it wouldn't take many just to destroy humanity forever.
So obviously with that, that's where the intro starts to end, and there's kind of a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue. Obviously that closing line from Bruce is pretty heavy. So it's setting up kind of this mystery, but it's also revealing a little bit about the character, and it gives the audience a hint of what this is going to be about. But the main thing is, for me, it all really comes down to that hook, and that's going to be different for every film in terms of how dramatic it is. Obviously with this film, it's pretty in your face. You definitely want to stick around to see what happens from here, but for other films, it can be a little more subtle. It's all going to really depend on the story and the subject matter. So really important, reveal a little bit about the story and then just hook the audience somehow. So that can either be a question, a statement, but just leave them wanting to come back to that next scene. after the intro. But we're going to check out another film here as well. So this is a film that I shot for Sigma lenses, and this is a short kind of portrait of a photographer, one of my friends whose name is Wayne Simpson. And for this was him going out to kind of photograph a subject, but really the theme and the main message in this film is one about evolving as a photographer and just kind of these struggles that we all face as creatives. So obviously the hook in this intro is a lot more subtle than with Bruce's, obviously completely different subject matter, but it still sets up a little bit about what the film is going to be about. So we'll check out the first, say, 45 seconds of this.
You can't plan how your career is going to go. I've hit so many dead ends, and I've definitely had a couple of points where, I thought, is this really worth it? Is anybody even looking at these? I think things inevitably just take form. It's just a matter of sticking at it long enough.
So obviously with this one, it's a lot more subtle, but my goal with this, since it was a portrait about a photographer, it's for Sigma lenses, probably other creatives, other artists are going to be watching this. I wanted to kind of bring the viewer into this film by making something relatable. So in this case, it's a portrait about Wayne, who's a photographer, who's a creative, and I wanted to really kind of explore a little bit of his journey as a photographer and the struggles that we all face. So you hear those opening lines about how you can't plan how your career is going to go and how he's had all these ups and downs. And, for me as a photographer, and I'm sure a lot of other creatives as well, it's instantly relatable, and you want to see from here where he goes with that and kind of how his story unfolds. So two very different examples, obviously two very different pieces of subject matter, but I figured it's a good way to show one that's a little more dramatic and then one that is kind of toned back a little bit. And it's important to tailor this to your subject matter. And the one thing for me with documentary films is not kind of playing things up to be something they aren't. So obviously with Bruce's film, the subject matter and his story was a little more dramatic. These are the realities of his life. He built this underground fallout shelter. But, Wayne is just a portrait photographer. He's a very talented, but his struggles as a creative are a very different feel than, building a nuclear fallout shelter. So for me, it's important to kind of walk that line where you aren't making things overly dramatic. And I feel like at times nowadays, that's something where like every story and every piece is super dramatic when it doesn't need to be. So two examples, but figured they're good contrast to kind of set up the importance of, opening your story up with something that's going to hook your audience and keep them around to continue on with the film. So next up, we're going to talk about the middle of the film, and basically this is where the bulk of the story is going to be and where it's going to unfold. And for me, this is where I focus on the history of the subject and then also bring in the conflict or the main message before finally resolving it in the end. Okay, so back to You Will Survive Doomsday. So obviously with the intro, we kind of left the audience hanging on this very kind of dramatic line. We see the shelter for the first time. So a lot of the times with films, after the intro, I'll get into kind of talking now about the character's history a little bit, just to start to reveal the character a little bit, especially when you're left curious about them after that opening hook. And it's really important with this to not let things drag out for too long. And, pacing is a skill that takes time to develop. But the one thing I would say that's really important is give your audience credit. Oftentimes I see people wanting to kind of spell things out, from A to Z, the person did this, then this, then this, but you got to give your audience credit and just, be confident that they're going to be able to figure things out on their own without you telling them absolutely everything. So it's a really fine balance. But for me, so jumping in to this one, getting into a little bit of Bruce's history so we start to learn about who he is. And then it's really a two-part process, the middle of the film for me. So it's, revealing a little bit about the character with the history, but then starting to bring in some conflict in the film. So we're not going to watch all of this with Bruce, but I'll show you a couple little parts just about how I did that.
My life has been a completely different life than most people have. I went into the service when I was 17. I spent 4 years on active duty then, and I was at one of the 5 bases in the United States where secret aircraft were allowed to land. We were sending these planes off to look for these Russian bombers that were coming into our airspace. And I could see, the threat in a different point of view.
So right away, starting to reveal some of Bruce's history just about when he was in the military. So after the intro, you're left wondering, what is this guy all about? Talking about nuclear war. Right away, we start to kind of answer that a little bit, and you learn about his history. But very quick. And then from here, I go into a quick section after this where he's talking about building the shelter. So we're starting to really learn about this character without spending too much time doing it. And then from there, it can start to reveal a little bit of the conflict in the film. So we'll jump into that part and take a look quickly.
People show up and say, we want to trip through it, view it, see it. I say, why? I mean, just here to take my time. You think, boy, crazy guy doing this. Generally, people just think I'm crazy.
So if you watched the last video as well, the kind of key point that I talked about was really trying to figure out what you want your main message in the film to be about. And for Bruce's film, it was one about kind of following your own path and sticking with what you believe is right in life, and not looking back on it and wishing you'd made changes and things like that. And that's what this structure is all going to kind of center around. So with Bruce, we hook the audience in the start with the lines about nuclear war. We reveal a little bit about his history, and now we're bringing in this conflict where he's talking about how people, kind of think he's crazy and stuff like that. So we're setting it up to be able to bring in that message at the end of the film, which is what the kind of closing part is all about. We'll talk about after. So we'll look at a part from the Sigma film, but really the middle of the film for me is starting to reveal who the character is, a little bit about their history, and then starting to bring in the conflict or that main message in the film itself.
When I first started shooting portraits, I was more drawn to aesthetics, shots that I thought looked cool, might get a response from people. The one image where it really clicked for me was a photograph of a man named Grizz. It wasn't a paid job, and that was the first time I gave myself permission to actually play with light. As soon as I saw the results on the camera, everything changed right there. After photographing Grizz, I all of a sudden had this confidence that I could tell a story. It's good right there. Once I could actually have fun with it and create a mood that I wanted, and I felt that ultimate control, then I felt my vision coming alive.
So again, very similar to with Bruce's, right after the intro, we jump into a little bit about Wayne's history, and this continues from that hook or that setup at the start of the film. So, in this film, at the start, Wayne is talking about just the struggles as an artist at the start of his career, and then we jump into a little bit about his history and how that unfolds. And obviously, this happens quick. In this specific story, Wayne talks about the point where he kind of finally discovered his style. But same idea, this film is a lot shorter. I believe the Sigma films are in 4.5 minutes, so things move quicker, but it's all about that hook, getting into some of the history of the character and starting to bring either that conflict or that main message to life in the film. But before we jump into talking about the closing part of the film, I just want to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor for this video, Storyblocks, which is a complete stock footage solution that works off of an affordable subscription model and gives you unlimited access to over 1 million assets such as footage, sound effects, graphics, and other creative elements. For me, doing video work and also filmmaking, it's really cool to have a platform that I can jump onto, just looking for different elements like sound effects, subtle film overlays, flashes, things like that I can use in my edits. And then also just having something like Storyblocks Unlimited All Access Plan, which allows me to not have to worry about paying for each element or worrying about how many downloads I have left. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out Storyblocks at the link in the description below. Let's jump back into it. So the final part we're going to talk about is the closing scene, and this is for me where I like to either resolve the conflict or introduce or reinforce the message in the film, or oftentimes even both of those. Okay, so back to You Will Survive Doomsday. So we kind of closed out the middle of the film with some conflict, you know, Bruce talking about people judging him, people thinking he's crazy, stuff like that. So it really sets us up nice now to be able to kind of resolve that conflict in the end of the film, in the closing scene, and bring that kind of main message out that we really want to tell, which is, you know, one about following your own path. So it's nice to have this flow because it allows you to pace your films and have a different feel throughout, just with the music you choose, the way you shoot, stuff like that. You know, the intro was very different than the middle of the film for us. The middle had varying points and feels to it. And now we're closing out where we're able to kind of resolve this conflict and have a little bit of a different feel. So it allows you to pace things nice as well. But let's check out the ending of this film.
Everything that I do and everything that anybody does is going to come to naught eventually. I've often thought, oh, the time I wasted doing this business, that thing, that project, you know, that was my path, and I followed it consciously and conscientiously. And I've come to discover that I dare not change one thing in the least.
So again, you know, we came out of that middle part of the film where you almost feel bad for Bruce's character, you know, him talking about this judgment, just the way that people have kind of treated him or judged him over the years, thinking he's crazy. But it set us up, and it allowed the close of this film to kind of end on a higher note and be this kind of positive message of, you know, following your own path and not changing anything, not looking back and wanting to change things. So really the close is where you kind of tie everything together and you resolve things and you really kind of bring that main message out. And we'll check out the Sigma film as well, which again, I think is going to be a good example because these two films are very different, both in their length and then also in their subject matter.
After meeting all these different people and photographing them, I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago. I see all these people as people that I can learn from. I think it's important for photographers to find what it is that really speaks to them, not only aesthetically, but what does them good in their everyday life. As I'm meeting all these people and seeing different realities, I'm learning that there's a lot of stuff I didn't know about life. You know, I'm growing as a person because of it. It's getting to a place where it feels like I'm building a legacy that, you know, one day my kids can pick up a book that I've made and read the stories of the people I've photographed. I'm confident that they're going to learn things from those stories. For me, that's incredibly fulfilling.
So a nice example there, different than You Will Survive Doomsday, you know, but for Wayne at the start, we learn about the conflict, which is just, you know, his struggles as a photographer. We learn a little bit about his evolution in the middle of the film, but it's the closing scene where this kind of main message comes out, where you learn about, you know, photography for Wayne becoming something that's so much more than the aesthetics and the images, and about really the impact that his subjects have had on him as a human being and the lessons that he's learned. So really that closing scene is the point where we really bring that message to life and really kind of change the pacing of the film a little bit. So a bit of a different example from You Will Survive Doomsday, but again, it all just comes down to the subject matter and the story itself. Okay, so hope you all enjoyed this, and yeah, this is just kind of a basic overview of my approach for these films. And like I said, the specifics are gonna vary depending on each subject. Every story is a little bit different, but really it all just comes down to that intro where you give them a little hint of what's to come, some sort of hook to keep the audience around. The middle of the film where things kind of start to reveal themselves about the character, a little bit of the history, bring in some of that conflict, and then the outro of the film where you kind of resolve things, bring that main message to the forefront. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this. May do some more of this content in the future, even just talking about things from a production standpoint if that interests any of you. And yeah, also just want to say if you aren't following me on Instagram, I'll put a link below. That's where I post all of my work. So if you want to keep up to date with the stuff I'm making, you can check it out there. But other than that, just want to say thank you as always. And I appreciate all the support, all the comments, all that kind of stuff. And I'll talk to you soon.